Okay, so illusion of separation, understanding the ego. It's a big one. And I was wondering where to begin, as always. And I thought I'd tell a story this time. And this story is my understanding of who we are, where we began from, and how ego was then created to help us withstand a separation. So I go back in time in the very, very beginning, at the time when, as Adam and Eve, we lived in heaven. And what that means is it's not a physical place for me, heaven. It's a frequency. It's a frequency where we are not disconnected from our Creator. It's a frequency of pure love and pure existence in that love. So, that frequency of love for me is heaven. And so, we were wholly, beautifully, completely connected in our frequency with our Creator as Adam and Eve. And therefore, although now we see them as the masculine and the feminine, because we were one, there was no concept of separateness, even within Adam and Eve, because there was just one beautiful, unified consciousness of being connected. And then came the idea of separation. And however that idea was introduced, whether it was through temptation or a curiosity to discover, or the desire to live life another way and see if we can still maintain a frequency. However you decode the story that we're told of the serpent and the tree, however we decode it, whatever the reasons, and I choose to look at it as curiosity and a sense of adventure that we wanted to have. And so what happened was, in our curiosity as one, of being one, in our curiosity of wanting to experience beingness in another way, we separated ourselves. Now, separating ourselves happened at three levels. It started off with a separation from the Creator, so at a spiritual level, at an emotional level, which is a recognition or an awareness of who we are, the I. And the third one, which was at a physical level, where we call it the fall, or we know it as the fall, but we came down to a different frequency. And it is down, because when you're on this frequency of love, then it's any other frequencies, a reflection only of that frequency. So that separation happened on three levels. And in that moment where we fell from one frequency to the other, time and space as we know it, in my understanding, it was 5,000 years of falling of both Adam and Eve. And in that falling, the separation that was felt from the frequency of love, or the frequency of love, was so strong that there was an ego that was created to keep us safe so that it doesn't hurt as much. So we could begin our journey. Excuse me. So we could begin our journey with more hope than fear or sadness of the unknown. So in those 5,000 years of the fall of Adam and Eve, as they were falling through from one frequency to the other, they were also separate from each other. So there was a separation from the Creator, which is shifting of one frequency to the other. Then there was a separation of self from what was one, Adam and Eve together. Now there were two, man and woman. So there was a separation of self. And then there was, in that fall, a physical separation between Adam and Eve as well, between the masculine and the feminine. And when they did discover the earthly frequency of time and space as we know it, to be able to go forth and create anything, this separation played a very important role in keeping them safe. So the story that they began to tell themselves, and the story that the ego enabled them to tell themselves, was the fact that even in their separation from their creator, and even in the separation from each other, because Adam and Eve did not find each other on this frequency immediately either, and even in the separation of their awareness of self, there was some benefit. And the benefit that they saw and were made to see through the ego was the fact that it has now, ego came into play, and the role of the ego, the way it explained itself to Adam and then to Eve, was to keep them protected from a lot of unknown, because there was a lot of newness that was going to be experienced for the first time, and they weren't fully prepared. They were given all the resources, but the ego, the mind said, you're not fully prepared. So let me show you, or let me keep you safe while you go on your voyage of discovery, which was the creation of the earth as we know it. And so the ego first stepped in to keep us safe. And it also stepped in for us to have an awareness of each other as ones who are different from each other, ones who are separate physically because they're different bodies now existing, and ones who are not lost, because what the ego does, and that was its function, was that it began to act almost as an intelligent compass within you through all your experiences ever that you'd ever have. And that intelligent compass learned as it went. So it was a very, pay as you go, so learn as you go kind of compass. So through all the experiences that humankind had from the very beginning, the ego became more and more intelligent. I was going to say powerful, but I'd say intelligent, because it learned what safety felt like. It learned what, even in your adventures and your newness, what it felt like to not go beyond a certain point. So keep ourselves restricted or keep ourselves within a certain circle, even in the most adventurous ways, still keep ourselves safe. It taught us what not to do. It also taught us to stay limited in many ways. So whereas ego was playing a very, very important role in keeping us safe, it was also playing an equally important role in keeping us limited. Now imagine beings of, or part of a frequency, which is where we come from, a frequency of ultimate love, a frequency of ultimate oneness. Suddenly we find ourselves at a frequency where we are all away from each other. And we can even see ourselves through our patterns, through our behaviors, through our thought process. We can even see ourselves. So there's this, like a stark sense of awareness of ourselves and the fact that there are others outside ourselves, and how everybody is so different from each other. And that was one of the crucial role of ego, to be able to keep everybody in their own limited circles and limited cycles. So that's the role that it was playing. But imagine those beings of light, the ones that we are, created in one frequency and created in the ultimate oneness of your creator, suddenly finding ourselves boxed within our bodies as well. Because what we now call the soul is a compact, is unlimited, infinite energy or light being packed very tightly in boxes of the body. So those infinite beings that we are find ourselves being packed in these dense bodies, and we've been given the gift of the ego, and I call it the gift of the ego, so we don't panic and try to break out of this, and we give ourselves a chance to have the experience that we came here to have, and also give ourselves the chance to remember who we are, where we came from, being more enriched with the experiences as human beings. So where ego helped keep us safe, it also helped, or it also played the role of keeping us contained. And over time, because ego is an intelligent, it didn't start off like that. It was at the time that it was born, it was very clear on what its function was, right? That's the beginning of humanity as we know it. It was very clear on what its function was, which was safety, preservation, which was making sure that we are discovering and creating, but doing it in a way where we don't hurt ourselves and don't lose our lives. So that's what its function was. But over millions of years, the ego found itself becoming more and more intelligent. So it learned, like in any artificial intelligence would, it learned patterns, behaviors, emotions. It learned through all of its five senses. It learned how to make this illusion of separation, whose original job was to keep us safe, but the illusion of separation make it stronger and stronger. And so what it learned through its becoming of its powerful self that it is today, which is the ego, what it learned was anybody who spoke different from us was different. Anybody who looked different from us was different. Anybody that we could hear differently was different. Anybody who felt different was different. Anybody who believed. So as the ego became more intelligent, it also learned ways to make us believe, us as in the souls, the spirits, make us believe in its intelligence, to trust it more. Because all the information that it was giving to us, based on the five senses that it was gifted with, was accurate. People looked different, they talked different, they behaved different, they thought different, they reacted different. Like they were just different. Everybody was different. We were different in different moments as ourselves also. In different situations, in different circumstances, in different relationships. The same person would show up as different personas in different moments. And so we believed in what the ego was telling us, that we are these mutable creatures who are extremely separate from each other, and sometimes separate from ourselves as well. And that this was all there was to it. And because the program of the senses, the five senses, was so strong, because it was learned over millions of years, it was so strong for most of us. It was so strong that it overpowered the initial software program of remembering our frequency of love or where we came from. And now, of course, this is for most of us and not all of us, because in each timeline, we have had light beings who we call prophets and seers, the awake ones. All of those have come through time and will continue to come, who have a stronger frequency of the divine in them than the human frequency. And they came with this explicit mandate, which was to make us be aware, or to wake up to our egos and the illusion of separation. And so their message looked different through different timelines based on the belief systems of that particular history or geography. But at the end of it, all they talked about was remember who you are, remember where you come from, and remember your truth. And only by remembering your truth will you also remember that all of us are not different, and the senses have been originally designed to keep us safe, not to keep us limited. And that's where the big difference comes in. The difference between being safe and being limited. And so, as the ego became more intelligent, the sixth sense, or the other senses, the seventh and the eighth and the ninth and the 10th as well, but the sixth sense began to be overridden by this powerful, intelligent program of the ego. And so, it's not as if that sixth sense went away. It's always a frequency that's inside us, right? It's a frequency of remembering the universal knowledge and the one consciousness, the place that we come from, the place that we call home, the original frequency of love. So it's never not there. But because the program riding on top of it is so strong that it is muted, or it is weakened by the ego's control or the power. So when we begin to understand the ego, we actually begin to separate the safety instincts and the five senses from the other senses that we have. So not the five senses is what we use to separate ego from the original self or the soul self. And that does not mean then, because there are a lot of teachings which talk about ego death and like killing the ego pretty like brutal and dissolving the ego in some big barrel of like acid, whatever. Five senses are the ego, five senses equals ego. So it's not a bad thing. It is an artificial intelligence that's learning very strongly, very efficiently from its environment. But here's the thing, we're not of this frequency. We're not earthlings. We are spiritlings who are briefly occupying this frequency. And why we're doing that is to learn more about the expansion of our soul, which in the original dimension of love was a limited way of learning. And in this earth dimension of love, it's an infinite school of learning. And that's why we came here. So, in remembering ourself at the original self, we begin to look at the ego, not as the bad guy, not as the other, not as something to overkill, something to kill, but definitely something to overcome, and overcome in a very specific way, like you would override a program and when you install a new program. So override it. I like this term, override the ego, not kill it, maim it, destroy it, but override the ego. And what that looks like is that we do not let ourselves be subject to or limited by or react from a place of the five senses. Five senses have their part to play. Put that aside and now tell me who you are. And so in any of the spiritual practices or any of the self-discovery paths, it is never about creating. It is about remembering who we are. And then once we remember it well enough and we can hold that frequency strongly enough, frequency of love, frequency of oneness, we then begin to create from a place of love and oneness. And so once we begin to occupy that frequency more and more, then we use the ego. And I really like this example that a friend of mine who was also on the same path, he was sharing this with me, and we've been on the same path for like 14 years together. So he was sharing this with me. He said, it's almost as if we are the donkey and we let the ego ride us. And when we become aware of the ego, we ride the ego. It's really as nobody dies. Nobody has to die. But we begin to ride the ego because the ego has its use. And the use is to make your earth life more efficient, not more fruitful, not more beneficial, not more expansive, not more fulfilling, but more useful, more efficient. That's the use of the ego. And so it has its role. And when you begin to tap into the frequency of love and you begin to see, or the frequency of oneness, which is the original place that we come from, in ourselves, and we begin to look at the ego in the limited way that we is, this is what happens. And I love this concept of quantum entanglement in this case as well, where two particles who have come into contact with each other or have also been observed by the same eye together, where no matter how many light years of a difference there is, physical distance there is between them, they are now forever connected because those two particles have exchanged energy. Now imagine, from the same story, if all of us come from the same frequency, space, and which is one frequency of oneness, that means that we have all known each other since the beginning of, I can't even say time, since the beginning. We've all known each other. We're all connected to each other. And therefore, the effect of the butterfly's wing. So when we begin to look at ourselves as one in the quantum field, we're all entangled with each other. Then when we look at the world outside us and it hurts us to see the world in pain, to see the world suffering, to see the world needlessly going through torture and destruction, it hurts the sensory part of us, the ego part of us. And the ego part of us tells us that it is happening because ego always tells stories, right? So it is happening because those people living in that place did this and this, and therefore the result is this and this. And so now we have a logical conclusion to the destruction and the mayhem being caused in the world, and that satisfies us, but also satisfies our logic, but also makes us extremely angry and disconnected and distant and separate from those bad guys who are destroying everything that we like, however we look at it, and how we are the good ones who are now judging them and looking at them doing bad things. So that's the result of observing pain and suffering in the world from an ego's mind or from the ego's eyes, because it seeks to make or create explanations for things which do not make sense, because it just wants to feel more safe in the fact that it is occupying a hugely uncertain world, and it has no idea when it's going to, conk off or be things are going to be taken away from it. So it's going to tell itself a story to keep itself safe, right? That's what we do. So that's why there's a concept of good guys versus bad guys. If as long as we don't have bad guys around us, we are good, we are safe, and nothing bad will happen in our life. And yet when things do happen in our life and there are no bad guys involved but just incidences, then we talk about a bad God who is doing things to us because we've earned it and all of that. So then ego will always come up with a story to blame another or to look at others for things happening, the things that it's observing through its five senses, because that's the only way that it can survive. And yet, so this is the ego's way of observing the world, right? And so what the ego seeks to do is change people, change things, bring about revolutions, go out onto the roads and say something or do something. And that's what the ego wants to do, because it sees the outside as the other, and therefore the change that it wants to create or bring will always be on the outside. Those are the five senses and the limited way that we observe the world through those five senses. And so that's what the ego does. Now you flip that conversation and you look at the same scenario, the same world that we're inhabiting right now, through the eyes of the soul. And the eyes of the soul, which is now in the quantum field. And the only thing the soul understands is that the outside world is a reflection of the inner chaos and the inner mayhem that I have inside me right now. Not five people like me, not even one other person like me. What the spirit or the soul understands in itself is the fact that if that soul is observing war or rape or murder and looking at or trying to come to a point where it's happening because those bad guys are making it so, and in its judgment, it is transferring its power away from itself to the world. And that's what it would do if it were the ego. But as a soul observes this world, it immediately, so it observes, and that's almost like a physical action that I think of, which is it observes, and immediately, in that instant, it turns its gaze inwards. And it says, without judgment of the outside world, the only thing that the spirit or the soul says is, I have observed murder, rape, murder, chaos, mayhem. Turn inwards as to why I have observed this and what inside me is feeling this chaos, is feeling this mayhem. So it's almost as if a soul will now take full responsibility for the events that it is observing on the outside, because it realizes the fact that it is not separate from the world. Just because I am not in a certain geography, picking up a hatchet and murdering someone does not mean that it's not me. It means that there is something inside me, and that's something I'll just explain a little bit as well. There's something inside me that is holding up the frequency of chaos and rage and murder. And because I am contributing or holding up that frequency of chaos or rage or murder, it is being exhibited by a killer in another continent. Just exhibited. But I will have to take complete responsibility for what I'm observing. Why do I say that? It's because we are frequencies. We are energy, and therefore we operate at different frequencies. Whereas we come from the frequency of love, we have other adjacent frequencies adjacent or diverse frequencies of hatred, of violence, of darkness, of sadness, of despair, of hopelessness. And those are all legitimate, valid frequencies. They're not illusions, they're actual frequencies. And what, as a soul, what I understand is, as the creator of my cosmos and the creator of my universe and the observer of my universe as well, if I am observing murder and rage outside and I am passing judgment on the other, I am actually choosing to connect myself to the frequency that I have inside me of judgment. And we know what happens when you plug into a frequency of judgment. It begins from judging, oh, he's a bad person, to, if he's a bad person, you begin to realize all the bad things you've done in your life. So you begin judging yourself. You begin judging yourself and you say, okay, I'm not even worthy. So it's a downhill spiral from there. I'm not even worthy. If I'm not worthy, I'll just go ahead and drown my sorrows in ABC addictions. Now that I'm drowning my sorrows in ABC addictions, I'm even not worthy even of having the relationships in my life. So it's like a domino effect, right? That's been created just from judging, if we don't take responsibility for the fact that whatever we are observing outside us is, if we choose to observe it from a lower frequency, a lower vibration of hatred or jealousy or greed or judgment or fear, we are choosing to plug ourselves into that frequency. And the moment we have plugged into to that frequency, because it's a frequency that's held up by a series of vibrations, we have added our vibration to that frequency. And now the frequency of murder and the frequency of chaos must get stronger because now we have added our vibration to it. And that's the choice we make when we look at the world outside as one separate from us, because the ego and the five senses tell us that. We make judgments or we react to that world, then we are adding to the frequencies, the lower vibrational frequencies of the bad things happening outside the world. And they will continue to happen because there's a frequency that exists, but now you have added your vibration to it. And now your vibration will contribute to making that frequency stronger. It's really as simple as that. So when you begin to take responsibility of the fact that nothing is separate from you, your five senses are designed to keep you safe, not to keep you limited, and nothing is separate from you. So when you observe the world outside you, you have a choice choosing which you can look at the world from a specific frequency. So you can choose to look at it from the vibration or the frequency of love. And what you will then see is just beauty and love and everything around you. That does not mean that other frequencies and other vibrations do not exist, but you are not contributing to it. You're not contributing to it. And every time that you make a choice to not contribute to, and that's what I think Mahatma Gandhi also said, be the change that you seek to change in the world. Be that change. What does it mean, be that change? It means choose the frequency with which you are now going to show up in the outside physical world. And when you choose the frequency of love, you're responsible for it. Does not mean that all the other frequencies dissolve, but you are not contributing to those frequencies. And therefore, the biggest change that you can make is the one that you make in yourself. When you understand that you are not separate, as the ego tells you, as the ego has also learned. It's not an alien thing that's been given to us, ego, right? It's something that was designed to keep us safe in that separation from our creator, from our God self, and from a higher vibration frequency. It was just designed to keep us safe. So the ego is telling you that there are others, does not mean that there are others. They are all reflections. They're all parts of you. They're all linked in. They're all quantum entanglement. They're all synced into your frequency. And you have, and that's the other thing, as a universe, because you're a complete, self-sustaining, complete universe, you will have all frequencies within you. You will have all frequencies, unless you go and hide in the jungle and only decide to practice the frequency of love and interact with no other human being and then see no news and just completely cut yourself off. There will always be a multitude of other frequencies existing within your universe. So they're always there for you to look at them, for you to contribute to them or not. So the moment we choose not to contribute to that frequency of hatred or jealousy or greed or distance or separation, we are and we're choosing to look at the world to the frequency of love. Those frequencies will remain, but we are not adding strength to them. And when that happens, and it's not as if, and so this is a question that's been asked, like, when you choose to look at the world through the frequency of love, does that mean that all the bad things, because I have made a deliberate choice not to tune into news, not to read newspapers, not to be a part of the stories of tragedy that we tell ourselves and other people tell us, does not mean that those events and instances are not happening. Does not mean that. But it does mean that in my observation of it, I have a choice. When I observe it, so I can only share my experience, when I observe, for example, the big tragedies which happen in the world, I don't observe, and I choose not to. I choose not to observe them through a lens of pity, because I don't want to add to the vibration of pity. But I do choose to observe them through a place of ease, which is the dua that I make, Ya Allah, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim. Send ease, add ease, give ease to them in this moment. So I make two decisions. One is I choose to look at them through something that is happening in my universe, that in which there's an opportunity for some ease to come in. And whatever lessons have to be learned for those people, may those be learned with ease. So that's my choice. Similarly, when I apply those tragedies now, or those big moments now to my life, and it's still a practice that I am practicing, not mastered it, I don't know if I ever will, I have a choice to look at that moment with either from a place of love or from a place of lack. It's really like abundance or lack, love or absence of. There's no other frequency, right? So when I make, in any moment that's happened in my life, when I choose to, and there have been many, so when I choose to look at those moments, or one moment from a place of love and from a place of abundance, what happens within that moment, it's almost as if the moment was an apricot. And I chose to look, and that apricot, imagine, was completely, and it's a little bit of a magical, like a suspension of belief, disbelief, whatever. So say that I chose, that moment in my life was a dry, rotten apricot. Okay, in its physical form. That's what it felt like to another human being who was observing it. And so I looked and acknowledged the fact that this moment is a dry, rotten apricot. But I also acknowledged the fact that if I were to close my eyes, and closing my eyes is a very important part of it because my senses will limit me. If I were to close my eyes, I can almost imagine the bursting of the beautiful seed of a new apricot that lies within this apricot. And when I choose to focus on the bursting of that beautiful seed that lies within that, having closed my eyes within that apricot, that rotten apricot, that seed must break through. It must blossom. That's my belief. And that's how frequencies work anyway. So it might not blossom from that exact apricot, but that seed of a beautiful, fresh, ripe apricot that you can sink your teeth into and, feel beautiful, feel fulfilled, feel abundant, that must blossom. And you must receive the blossoming of it, and you must receive the nectar of it because you have imagined it so. So it does not take away from the reality of that apricot. But when I close my eyes and I go into my quantum field, in that quantum field is an equally beautiful apricot waiting to burst forth for me because I have imagined it so. And so that is the power. But equally, so that's the power of the frequency of love. But because we are a very, very powerful observer, equally powerful is the observer's effect on, if I truly were to focus on the rottenness and the dryness of that apricot in my hand right now, eyes wide open. And if I were to truly focus on that and say, wow, what a dilapidated, useless apricot I have in my hand. And there is no way that anything good is ever going to come from this apricot, and I'm going to chuck it away. So, well, that is a powerful, because observer will always be an observer. So that is a powerful observer statement also. And what you have now done is that you have chosen to plug yourself into the frequency of lack, frequency of displeasure, frequency of not having enough, frequency of disdain. And because you have now plugged yourself into that, more of such things which are on the same frequency, so whether those are people, moments, events, news, posts, etc., will now find their way to you because you've plugged into that frequency. It's really as simple. It's an exchange of energy that you've done. So we have a choice. If we were to look at the ego as a way, as an artificial intelligence that limits us but also has a function, if we were to look at it in that way only and understand that we are quantum first and we have a powerful choice in each moment in the way that we observe the world, then the concept of separateness begins to fade away. And what that also means is that we become very, very powerful creators, no matter what the circumstances. So I know that manifestation is this big word and it has a big fan following. And, it is something that people believe that we do. Manifestation is not what we do, it is who we are. We are manifestors. So as the cosmos that exists, anything around us is our manifestation. The only thing we're doing when we choose to separate ourselves from our ego, which is the limitation of the five senses, we are choosing to now act as deliberate manifestors. And when we begin to act as deliberate manifestors, then we have the power to sift through what we like, what we don't like. And so the other after effect, and I call it the after effect because it's not the primary role, but the after effect of being able to see your ego and separate yourself from it, in understanding it, separate yourself from it, now you can actually take charge of your life and create what you want to create. So one aspect of it was be the person, the feeling that you want to be, which was observing and plugging yourself deliberately on the frequency of love and oneness. And the other one then is now create what you want to create. And when we begin to create what we want to create, because we now understand that we are quantum, we do understand that we all are all connected. And I don't just mean from a people aspect, but everything is connected. Everything, every leaf, animal, flower, a job interview, a telephone call, a social media post, and a person who has never heard your name at the other end of the world, all connected, because now you are choosing to stand as quantum in your quantum field, and you are choosing to now not be limited by the five senses, and you're in the process of deliberate creation. So separating ourselves from our ego empowers us then to create the futures that we so ardently seek to know more of. What is going to happen tomorrow? Well, you can predict the future by creating it. That's the only way to predict the future, the only way. And so the more the more we break out of the limited shell of the ego, and we go back to our quantum selves, the more timelines we have the power to unfold in our quantum field. And all timelines that are true to your heart begin from one timeline, begin from one frequency. And that frequency is the frequency of Allah, the frequency of love, unconditional love, and the frequency of oneness. So when you stand in the quantum field, you understand that the person that you abhor and the person that you are crazy madly in love with are both really the same, interchangeable, if you were to look at it from a quantum field perspective. And so how does that translate into our feelings and emotions and our relationships? Being quantum, understanding the ego, how do we translate that, and how does it come down into our daily life? So how it translates is that we begin to show up in relationships in a more deliberate fashion. Like some would call it mindful, but I would say more deliberate fashion. And so every time that you step into into your lounge to be with the people that you love at home after a long day at work where 5 things have not gone really well, and you've just had like a crazy bout of traffic on the way back as well, and now you have three other chores to do, and it's already 7 o'clock. Say that's the scenario, and you're quantum, and you're stepping into your lounge to be with your family, to be with your loved ones, and there is something that's not gone according to your plan. And that's where the practice of being quantum is not just a top line PowerPoint presentation concept, right? It has such strong translation into your everyday life, because when you walk into that room, first you are a deliberate manifester, creator. You are quantum as you're walking into that room. When you're showing up into two or three of those relationships in that room, you are deliberately choosing to look at them from a place of abundance and love. Now, they're not acting as if they deserve your abundance or love in that moment, right? Because the reactions and the response, and that will never, that's really not even your concern, but the reactions and responses are feeding information to you, saying, you're looking at them from a place of abundance and love. And the information that you're receiving is, they're just crap human beings right now. Now, the information in understanding the ego, we know that what we are hearing, what we're seeing, what we are feeling really with our skin also, all three are senses inputting their behaviors to us. And that input of information is a limited input of information, and you choose for that information to stop at your ego. So it's almost like if you're entering the room, this is your ego, and this is actually you, your quantum self. And so the information that you're receiving is an information that the ego is perceiving. It's not getting the right reactions based on my actions, right? So that means that they're just bad people, and they're really here to ruin your day. But that's what your ego's output is to the information that it's getting, which is legitimate because that's what it's learned over time. It learns to read people's behaviors and draws its conclusions and says, this and this is equal to this crap person here to ruin my day. Like, that's the ego's conclusion. And yet when you're looking at, you're saying, okay, so that's the reaction of that person. That means there's a part of me that is feeling crappy right now. The fact that there are three people reacting crappily to me, because now you are not going to give a lot of importance to those reactions of those people as souls, as spirits. You're saying those people are acting crappy right now can only mean one thing. That's the only conclusion you will draw, not your ego. You will draw. I am feeling crappy in some way within myself. So now you have, as quantum, you have a few options. You remove yourself and you say, you know what, I need some time on my own. I need some time out before I can show up in this scenario because I'm feeling tired, etc., etc. And then whatever your me time looks like for the 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 1 hour, the whole night, doesn't matter. Take that me time. But until you are not feeling, and once you understand that now you're not feeling crappy, now you're not thinking of the long day you've had and the crappy traffic on the way, and now your frequency is stabilized and the frequency is ready to observe the people who love you in the goodness or from the frequency of your goodness, then you show up in that scenario. And so when we begin to do that more and more, what it basically means is that you're choosing to add your vibration to the frequency of love. And because you have made that choice in that one moment, which is so small, right? It feels so small in the larger scheme of things in the cosmos, blah, blah, blah. Such a small choice you have made, which is that you have chosen to not look at the people that you love through the eyes of a lower vibration that you're feeling, or through the eyes of your ego. You've chosen to look at them from a frequency of love. And yes, you've needed some time out in between, and that's fine, but you've chosen to. At the end of it, you have added to the frequency of love, and you making that choice in that moment is the most powerful act that you would have ever done to have changed the world. Because it is, in fact, each vibration added to a frequency makes that frequency stronger. The stronger that frequency is, sometimes it penetrates into the most unlikely hearts, not because of some magical phenomenon, but because it's just pure physics, right? The frequency is so strong that it's going to override all of the frequencies. So the only job that we have to do, why do we have to understand the ego so badly? The only job we have to do is in understanding the ego. We learn to separate different vibrations, we learn to separate different frequencies, and we learn to understand all these frequencies, all these vibrations are within us, and that all the actions that we see outside us are just depictions of those frequencies and vibrations. And you have a choice to contribute to the master frequency that you believe in, which is that of love. And you have a choice not to contribute to the lower vibrational frequencies that so many other people are choosing to contribute to. And you have the belief that the more you contribute to the frequency of love, the stronger that frequency will become, is becoming, till the time that that frequency of love is so much the primary frequency that either people who don't feel it will just fall off the grid, like graduate to the next level, die, or they'll just hop on. And the lower vibration part of it will always remain. Shadow is legitimate. It'll always be there, right? The lower vibration frequencies always be there. They have a role to play. But the overriding frequency, and our overriding frequency of humanity, of mankind, for a long, 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 long time, has been death and destruction and power play. We don't remember a moment of peace, not in the documented history lifetime, but as souls, we remember. As souls, we know what it is to coexist in beautiful, perfect harmony as one, and where each choice of a loving word spoken or a loving eye beholding another has a power to change the fate of the world. And that's why understanding the ego, for us to be able to make a deliberate choice as the deliberate creators that we are. So that was my little bit of my story time. I hope you choose, if you are plugged into this particular frequency. I hope it becomes easier for all of us to choose deliberately the frequency of love more and more so, because it is not easy. It is not easy being human. It is not easy being alive in this time and age, and it is not easy choosing this journey. And because it's not easy, I wish you ease, I wish you love, and I wish you a lot of abundance, and I wish you a remembering of who you are, where you come from, and the infinite power that you hold, which is not limited by your five senses, which is not limited. So much love.